Nintendo used to take risks. Sometimes it paid off, sometimes they landed flat on their face, and this is the story of the latter. This video is going to be as much about Nintendo's history as it is about their future. Why I think the Switch 2 might be destined to fail. I mean, Nintendo makes great games, but their track record when it comes to their hardware, well, it would be generous to call it a mixed bag. That's why I'm doing this video, is because I'm diving headlong into the most egregious issues with Nintendo's systems. And this is going to be in order of chronological release date, and we're going to cover the mainline consoles and we'll touch on hardware revisions when relevant. So without further ado, let's get into the video. First up, we have 1985's Nintendo Entertainment System. The NES, with its signature rectangular anti-human controller, is the OG. I mean, it really is the thing that kind of modernized the gaming industry. It revived a dead gaming industry, and Nintendo took the opportunity to rebuild the industry in their image. Back in the day, it was the Nintendo Entertainment System, the NES, or the original Nintendo, as we called it in my circles. We're children of the late 80s, me and my friends. So by the time we were old enough to be conscious and recognize what video games were, the SNES was kind of the thing. So we called it the original Nintendo. And it was really Nintendo's first true home console. This was the first console that I ever played. It was incredible. I mean, I remember sitting on the floor at my friend Caleb's house, and we were playing Super Mario Bros. 3 on his television. In fact, it was this cartridge right here. This is the very first video game I ever remember playing. And man, this game changer right here. This was amazing. But before we could actually get the game to work, we had to blow into the cartridge to clean the game, quote unquote. Don't do this, by the way. This is not how you do it. It's common knowledge nowadays that you should not blow into the cartridge, since the humidity in your breath, along with any particulates that might come out while you're blowing, is going to actually make the cartridge dirtier and less likely to work than it would be to just clean it with some isopropyl alcohol. Despite the playground wisdom being that games won't play because of a dirty cartridge, that usually wasn't the actual issue. It was the fundamental design flaw of the cartridge loading mechanism that caused games to stop working. When you loaded a game into your console and pressed it down, you would actually end up bending the pins on the motherboard. You can hear the pins screaming from this far away. Eventually, you'd bend the pins to the point that they would no longer reliably make contact with the cartridge. And if the CIC lockout chip in the NES couldn't make contact or couldn't communicate with the cartridge, then you'd end up with the notorious blinking red light. The fun fact about this, the blinking red light was actually caused because the CIC chip couldn't actually make contact with the CIC chip in the cartridge, which was the security chip, and then it would end up just restarting the console over and over again. Pretty neat to know that, actually. This was Nintendo's very first mass market game system, and they're already off to a bad start. This does not bode well for the next 35 years. The big flaw was the loading mechanism. It destroyed the pins and the contacts. 1989, we saw the Game Boy. What can be said about the Game Boy? I remember when I first got my DMG-01, which was the model number of the original Game Boy. It was around the time that the Game Boy Color had released, and don't worry, we'll get to that in a minute. I inherited it from my friend Caleb, actually. Now, I got to play Pokemon Blue on that bad boy for hours at a time, but it's hard to revisit it on the original hardware because of the unbacklit screen. If you've never played a game on the original Game Boy hardware, then you're in for a nasty surprise. At the time, the screen was mostly serviceable. It was novel and exciting technology. There was this kid that I used to go to church with. His name was, we'll call him Nephi. And when I showed him my Game Boy, he was extremely confused. He kept looking at the screen and then craning his neck around to look at the back of the handheld. And then he'd kind of look at the screen again and look at the back. And I could not for the life of me figure out what he was doing. He did it several times before I was like, yo, Nephi, what are you doing? And he's like, how did they make the TV screen so small? He was looking for this part of the TV that should have been sticking out the back of the Game Boy. And to his credit, I mean, this was what TVs looked like back then, and they weren't flat like they are now. This was not a common thing in the 1990s, all right? A typical CRT television had a massive tube in the back that was sticking out from the back of the TV. It made your entertainment console be like this deep. It was crazy, especially if you had a huge television. So it's fair to say that the dot matrix display of the DMG-1 was novel at the time. We didn't really know any better, but today, this display is basically unusable. Here's Nintendo once again lying to us about their products. It doesn't help that age and chemical reactions have caused this to become even worse than it was, with ghosting and pixel response time and contrast being incredibly low between pixel and non-pixel. I don't know if you can tell, but there's supposed to be a J piece here in Tetris that's falling down the screen, and yet you can barely make out what it's supposed to be. And did I mention that there was no backlight on this thing? None. These were actual criticisms of people who knew better about like the Game Boy screen. There were competitors like the Game Gear that had a backlit screen, even had color. But to be fair, I never noticed anything was wrong with this screen until I was an adult. However, I do have a criticism about this device that I had when I was a kid. Batteries. This chunker took 4 AA's. I should probably mention that I grew up super poor, and so we didn't have money for frivolous things like batteries, especially not to be used in a Game Boy. But the DMG-01 took 4 AA cells, and it would chew through them. I remember playing Pokemon Blue. I beat the game after burning through probably 5 sets of AA's. That's what? 5 times 4? I can't do math. I'd steal the batteries from remotes or whatever else I could find in the house in order to play my Game Boy. And it got to a point where it was such a costly hobby. I was doing like chores and stuff for my neighbors in order to make money to play games on my Game Boy. I ended up asking for a power supply for my birthday. It didn't occur to me that I could buy a power supply for myself when I was a kid. So, you know, par for the course. So to sum up the Game Boy, its flaws were massive battery requirements, as well as an outdated and unlit screen. Now I want to pause for just a moment and ask if you're enjoying this video, because if you are, you should hit that subscribe button. It helps this show out tremendously. This is a new style of video for me, so if you want to see more, let me know by hitting that subscribe button. You can also like that smash button to tell YouTube you want to see more videos like this. And did you know that I actually posted this video as an article over on my blog? Check it out. There's a link in the description. All right, 1991, the Super Nintendo. When I started making this list, I had a flaw for every Nintendo console. There were so many flaws of Nintendo consoles in my head that it didn't occur to me that there would be a console that I thought might be perfect. But then I got to writing this section of the video and I realized I don't really know what is wrong with the Super Nintendo. I'm gonna have to think about this for a minute. So I wrote most of the rest of this video and then came back to the Super Nintendo. And I'm not gonna lie to you, there aren't too many flaws with the SNES. However, I didn't have to stretch very far to find an issue. And it's one that I actually encountered as a kid as well. See, my big cousin Josh had an NES and an SNES before he went off to college. And his mom, that would be my Aunt Cindy, asked me if I wanted them. This was like 1995 or 1996 or something, and I was like, heck yes I do. So she not only gave me a big box of consoles and controllers and games, but she also gave me this. This is not mine, I found this online, but this is what I got. I got this NES TV stand and a little TV to go on top of it. I pulled this from Ice Cream Man 69 on Reddit. Thank you, my guy. Mine looked exactly like this, and I kind of want to find one. So if you have one and you want to sell it, hit me up, because I really want one of these. So I was really stoked. I had all of these new games and consoles, and I had this cool thing, and I could have all these things set up in my bedroom, which I was super stoked for. And then I started setting up the consoles, and I realized the SNES power adapter was missing. Yeah. No big deal, I said to my 8-year-old self. I'll just use the modular power supply that I have. And yes, when I was an 8-year-old, I had a modular power supply. It was my pride and joy. I loved technology and power and electricity and stuff like that when I was a kid. I shocked myself disassembling a VCR once. It was awesome. And that's probably why I'm so stupid today. And here's the thing. I went looking for a modular power supply that looked close enough to what I used as a kid, but this one looks almost exactly like the one I used as a kid. Even with this little plus-shaped barrel adapter, like all of these things This thing looked exactly the same. The polarity adjustment, the voltage indicator, I think the only difference was mine went up to 24 volts instead of just 12. Yes, I was a huge geek as a kid because I had one of these and I loved it. But here's the problem, okay? This right here is the back of a Super Nintendo. I don't know if you can tell. Can you see what the problem is? That's a proprietary barrel jack. And none of the adapters I had on my modular power supply would fit on there. I had to go out and do some more chores, some more lawn mowing and whatever over the summer so that I could save up to buy myself an official power adapter. So that is my childhood flaw with this device, let's say. However, we also do have a retrospective flaw here, the notorious yellowing that every SNES seems to endure. Now, thankfully, actually, my SNES is only very slightly yellowed in a few places, which is nice. I like that. It looks good. But this looks like Kramer on Seinfeld when he fell asleep on the roof covered in butter.
Stick a fork in me, Jerry. I'm done.
The thing is, this happens because there's a flame retardant chemical that was sprayed onto the system, and that chemical reacts with the plastic and UV light, stuff from the sun, and that chemical reaction there adds a gross beige patina to vintage hardware. It's not just the SNES, actually, but many devices yellow over time. And the thing is, there is a way to ameliorate this. You can use RetroBrite to resolve this issue. It's only temporary, and if you leave your SNES in sunlight or even in like indirect sunlight, then it will start to yellow again. I've also read reports that retrobriting makes the console shell more brittle, so buyer beware maybe. So yeah, the biggest issues here with the SNES, the proprietary AC power adapter and the yellowing shell issue. All right, the Virtual Boy. I remember playing this at my friend Matt R's house. I remember playing it and I remember feeling how dizzy I felt after using it and how underwhelmed I was by Mario Tennis. It's almost like you're there with Mario on that hellish tennis court. Tellero Boxer was kind of cool though. It's Nintendo's worst console by a country mile. It's got the smallest library of games with only 19 in the US and an install base of fewer than 1 million units. The Virtual Boy was a critical and commercial failure. And not to mention the fundamentally broken ergonomics, this wacky ass controller, and the disgusting retina burning red display that makes it an absolute failure. So to sum up the flaws of the Virtual Boy, it is the Virtual Boy. The N64 was a transformative system for me. I played all kinds of titles growing up, including Mario 64, Smash Bros, Perfect Dark, Pokemon Stadium, WWE No Mercy, Star Fox 64, and Wetrix. Don't you dare say anything bad about Wetrix. It's like Tetris, but wet. While I have a lot of really nice things to say about the N64, this is not a video about fond memories. No, this is all about the ways that Nintendo cheaped out and produced subpar consoles. And the N64 has a ton of issues. First, from a technical perspective, there's the insanely limited memory bandwidth and texture cache constraints of the console itself. This is a big deal. It means that from a game dev perspective, titles are limited in the size and the detail of their textures. And don't look now, but I think this Bob-omb is checking you out. Also, the N64 was released at the dawn of the optical media era, and Nintendo's decision to go with cartridges placed them at a massive technical and space disadvantage. It led to lackluster third-party support, and thankfully that's the only time we're going to be mentioning that in this video. But the biggest flaw of the N64, ladies and gentlemen, let me present to you the controller. It's wacky ass rumble pack action. And don't get me wrong, it's got that signature Nintendo weirdness that makes it almost charming. And at the time, this was a big leap forward for controllers, especially since they needed to accommodate 3D with an action stick or control stick or whatever they called it on that thing. The three-tine design here was categorically strange, but at the time we didn't really know any better. And the problem is today, my man-sized hands simply don't fit between the left and middle prongs. So it makes it hard for me to revisit the classics with contemporary hardware. But I'm literally 6'3" and I'm an actual giant, so that's a me problem, I guess. However, the real issue was the analog stick. I believe they called it the control stick back in the manual and stuff. Not only could the hard plastic tip give you blisters if you were playing Mario Party doing this guy, but repeated use would actually literally grind down the stick's innards, leading to an insane stick drift. Thankfully, this is the only time we're going to be talking about stick drift in this video too. So the biggest flaws with the N64, limited memory bandwidth and cache, terrible controller, and degenerative stick drift. All right, 1998, we have the Game Boy Color. The Game Boy Color, bring back transparent electronics, man. The Game Boy Color has all the same issues that the DMG-01 had, but this time in color. The screen was not backlit, and by this time, most competing devices had some kind of backlight. This would require that you played your Game Boy Color in a well-lit room. Yummy. It also saw reviews at the time criticizing the fact that the Color was still 8-bit while there were other competitors that had moved on to 16-bit. And I find this criticism to be largely moot since, well, I would personally take just about any first-party Game Boy Color title over any 16-bit title from any competitor any day of the week. However, this does show a trend of Nintendo being extremely conservative when it comes to upgrades, and I believe it's what we will see with the Switch 2 when it launches in June. The biggest flaw with the Game Boy Color is the limited upgrade over the original without solving any of the biggest problems with its predecessor's hardware. I guess they did reduce the number of batteries needed, but whatever. All right, 2001, we had the GameCube. I'm here for the Indigo all the way. Now, the GameCube, this is probably my favorite Nintendo console. We have Smash Bros. Melee, we have Super Mario Sunshine, F-Zero GX, we have Wind Waker, Metroid Prime, and tons of others. However, the GameCube's biggest flaw at launch was that it lacked DVD playback support for several reasons. If you look at the GameCube versus the other consoles of the era, it got beaten out because these other two consoles here, they had DVD playback. It's interesting though that until this point, every other flaw on this list was either a problem at launch that persists to this day, or that are only a problem in hindsight. Yet today, I don't think that the lack of DVD support is an issue at all. That is, unless you count my next point, of course. Historical context is key here because if the GameCube had come out with DVD playback support, well then, games would have been able to be distributed on full-size discs. And that would have meant that the GameCube would have had 4.7 gigabytes of storage to work with rather than the limited 1.4 gigabytes of mini DVDs that were actually being used in the GameCube at the time. That would have probably meant broader support from third-party developers, and it would have in turn perhaps meant that a wider install base of the Cube would have been achievable. The flaws include the use of mini DVD media and the lack of DVD video support. Again in 2001, we have the Game Boy Advance. Look at this svelte boy. The Game Boy Advance was a major step up for Nintendo handhelds. With a 32-bit ARM processor and the addition of an L and R button, the GBA established itself as the definitive handheld of the era. There are many classics on the Game Boy Advance, including Mother 3, many Super Mario Advance games that are all weirdly named, the Minish Cap, Metroid Fusion, and an impressive number of ports like Doom 2 and even Duke Nukem Advance, which I played the heck out of back then.
That's gotta hurt.
But the biggest flaw with the Advance was, again, the lack of a backlight and this barely intelligible screen. Literally a decade-old problem at this point, but I digress. Another issue that I had personally with the Game Boy Advance was the lack of dedicated sound hardware. The ARM7 CPU in this guy had to dedicate precious compute cycles to generate all of the sounds that you're hearing, and that led to particularly crunchy sounding sounds, very low-res sounding music and sound effects. So the flaws with the Game Boy Advance, we have a lack of a backlight for the screen, and at this point this has persisted across 3 generations, as well as a lack of dedicated sound hardware. Next up, we have 2004's Nintendo DS. The Nintendo DS, a system so nice, they gave it 2 screens. Now, I've got to be honest, I didn't pay much attention to this system. The 2-screen thing seemed like a gimmick, and thankfully that's the last time we'll be mentioning that in this list. My other cousin, Matt, had one of these, and it seemed kind of neat to me, like almost, but I was way more interested in the PlayStation Portable. I mean, guys, you cannot beat Patapon. Guys, you can't beat Patapon. Patapon, are you kidding me? It's awesome. The DS had lots of problems though. The first one was that this tiny little stylus here got lost all the time. My cousin lost his stylus within the first 2 months of owning it. That's just bad product design, especially if you know kids are going to be the target audience for this. But another issue was this hinge right here, guys. This hinge was terrible. It broke all the time. I can't count the number of friends on one hand who had broken hinges. The biggest flaws with the DS are the brittle hinge and the stylus was easily lost. Then in 2007, we had the Wii. Yes, the Wii, everybody. My first experience with the Wii was actually kind of nice. I remember picking up a Wiimote for the first time and waggling my way through in a terrible approximation of bowling.
Nice on.
Yeah, that's how it goes. That was pretty neat. It was almost fun. Like, I was kind of surprised by it. But frankly, the waggling was the Wii's biggest issue. The waggle appealed to folks who didn't really know any better, and I'm talking about non-gamers, while souring like core gamers to the idea of motion controls. I believe that today's veteran console gamers hate motion controls because of the waggle gimmick on the Wii. And look, the motion controls on the Wii were not great. So it's understandable that people who used the Wii once, especially core gamers who were like used to controlling games with precision and deliberacy, deliberacy, is that a word? I can understand why using like the Wii's really bad accelerometers and gyro would turn people off to that. But the fact is, today's gyros are awesome. Today's accelerometers are awesome. So gyro aim with a controller is an objectively better experience than aiming with an analog stick alone. Imagine this, but with more headshots. See, the Wii was innovative insofar as it was able to get your grandpa up off of his lift chair and playing fake tennis. But as far as core gamers go, well, the Wii was an absolute joke. I mean, they had Mario Galaxy games, which were fun, and Wario Land Shake It was kind of interesting, but like, I don't know, I can't think of many other Wii games that I want to go back and revisit. Also, the lack of HD TV support here would be excusable if both of his other competitors didn't also have that feature. And literally the GameCube was more well-positioned for HD output as it had a digital port on the back. It's yet another example of Nintendo ignoring the advancement of technology and just laying a soft-boiled egg instead. The flaws with the Wii include Wiimote waggle gameplay, lack of compelling first or even third-party titles, and zero HD TV support. All right, next up we have 2008's Nintendo DSi, and yeah, I mean, it's a truly iPod-inspired Game Boy. As I said before, I kind of steered clear of the DS handhelds, and that includes the DSi, so I had to do a little bit of research about this, and I didn't have to look very far because it's a Nintendo console. The DSi had notoriously brittle shoulder buttons. They would break if you dropped your system, they would break if you played your system. Heck, they would break if you looked at your system funny. But another issue was that the DSi ditched the GBA port, and that meant that there was no longer any backwards compatibility with Metroid Fusion or Mother 3, and at that point, what's the point of it even existing? So the flaws with the DSi include flaky, brittle shoulder buttons and the lack of a GBA port. All right, 2011, we have the 3DS. Now, the 3DS was interesting. I actually bought my 3DS at a yard sale on a whim, and it turned out to have all of the Ambassador games on it, and it was very neat. But the fact is, the 3D screen was a huge detriment to the console. The manual for the 3DS says right here, kids under the age of 6 should not play with 3D enabled. This was because it could impair children's developing eyesight. And you definitely don't want your kid growing up to be Steve Harvey. Now, I know this was over a decade ago at this point, but Nintendo, you're just gonna scare off parents and shoot yourself in the foot like that? You're gonna make a console where the primary gimmick will age gate the device from your main demographic? You doing okay? Not to mention, at least on the launch model, the 3D effect really only worked from a very specific angle and at one fixed distance from your face. I could never comfortably play with the 3D turned on, and so I didn't. I left the 3D stuff off 99% of the time, and so there were a ton of games that didn't even take advantage of it. It was so underutilized that they were able to release a cost-reduced 2DS version years later, and pretty much every game worked just fine. Also on my model, when you closed the hinge, the lower screen bezel would scratch the upper screen, which it just, I mean, look at this. This right here, unacceptable. Unacceptable. Flaws of the 3DS include poorly implemented gimmick 3D screen, the device damaging itself when using it in a normal way, And it could also damage children's eyesight. All right, we're coming up to near the end of the list here. We've got the Wii U in 2012. The Wii U was Nintendo's second biggest blunder after the Virtual Boy. Their marketing was terrible, the name was confusing, and the console was a pathetic first attempt at next gen. Next gen relative to, the Xbox and the PS2. I've tried not to talk too much about the games for these systems in this video because, frankly, barring the Virtual Boy, each system has a tremendous catalog of games. And they're fun and exciting and unique, and many of them push the industry forward. Granted, most of them are first-party Nintendo games, and that's pretty much the only reason to actually own a Nintendo console, at least since, the Game Boy. But here, the Wii U is the exception. We have Nintendo Land, ladies and gentlemen. We have Mario Tennis and Star Fox Zero. We have New Super Mario Bros. U and the profoundly baffling Paper Mario Color Splash. Like, were they even trying at this point? Paper Princess Peach was just informed that she's in a bad video game. There wasn't even a proper 3D Mario entry on this console, where the previous generation got 2 of them. We had 2 3D Mario games on the Wii. And despite having 3D in the name, this is not a 3D Mario game. Doesn't count. I'm sorry. 3D World is fun, but it's kind of like its own thing rather than being a mainline 3D Mario game. The Wii U's gamepad, this thing, was also very weird and had its own problems. You can't use the system without it, and you can't use more than one at a time. It's weirdly region locked, and the dual screen gimmick here was ham-fisted. And it was like not even as utilized as the 3DS's 3D screen. At least it inspired the ergonomics of the Steam Deck, so that's nice, I guess. Finally, the console is dog slow. It took forever to launch games, and it took even longer to update the thing. But hey, at least this console debuted Nintendo's first HD-ready console in 2013. The flaws with the Wii U: underutilized gamepad gimmick, underwhelming lineup of first-party titles, lame lineup of third-party titles, and incredibly slow system architecture. Finally, that brings us to 2017 with the Switch. Some consider it the GOAT, I consider it just okay. The Nintendo Switch, I mean, what can I say about this thing? It's weird. Frankly, I bought a Switch within the first few months of launch because, hey, there was kind of that backdoor that was discovered that allowed you to, install custom firmware on the thing. And I was like, I'm gonna get that before they fix the hardware. I'm gonna give the Switch a bonus point for that, actually. That's not a flaw, because if you remember at the beginning of this video, I said that the second criteria any console should be judged on is its modability. But the Switch has so many issues that I can't even hope to cover them all here. First of all, the Switch has a heat problem. After you've played your Switch for years, it can start to bow. I mean, look, right here, you see that little bow right there? That's no good. It's a slight warping, but that can't be good for the screen or any electronics in the device. I got this image from Nintendo Life. In just a few more years, they're gonna have themselves a boomerang. Realistically though, Joy-Con drift is probably the first problem that comes to mind when you think about problems with the Switch. And the fact that if I say problems with the Switch and something comes to your mind, even if you're not like a core gamer, that's a bad thing. And this is something that I've personally experienced on my Switch. And I have not played any games on my Switch besides Mario Odyssey and Metroid Dread. That's all I've done. I've beat those 2 games using the launch day Joy-Cons that came with my Switch. And that's it. Every other game that I've played on my Switch, I've played or beaten with a Pro Controller while the Switch was docked, okay? And if you look at like howlongtobeat.com, according to them, Mario Odyssey is a 12.5-hour game, while Metroid Dread is a 9-hour game. If you tack on at least 10 hours because I suck at video games, then we're looking at no more than 32 hours of playtime on these Joy-Cons. Yet the drift is absolutely real for me. Like, I can't stress enough, I have not played many games, if any, with my Joy-Cons, and yet I still experience Joy-Con drift. If your input looks like this, that is wacky ass. And also, nobody at Nintendo has actually properly acknowledged that the Joy-Con drift is an issue. But to me, that's not the system's biggest flaw in my book. One thing that I've alluded to multiple times throughout this video is Nintendo's Nintendo-iness? Nintendo is a weird company. They make weird consoles that take risks. Most of the time, those risks actually pay off and move the industry forward. Sometimes they don't, but many times they do. The portability and convertibility of the Switch is something that has sent shockwaves through the gaming landscape, particularly in the PC world with the Steam Deck. So that's a commendable risk to have taken with this hardware for sure. But one thing that the Switch is not, well, it's not really a Nintendo console. At least the software experience doesn't feel that way. The GameCube, the Wii, the 3DS, and yes, even the Wii U, their system software is iconic. It was to the point where back in the Wii era, Microsoft and Sony wanted to be Nintendo. Hell, the Xbox brought their Avatar system to the 3DS because of Nintendo's Mii system. You remember these soulless abominations? So where's the Mii Maker app on the Switch? It's hidden in a sub-menu in the system settings. It doesn't even have music, so I don't know why I'm adding music in post. Stop the music. We're just gonna sit here in silence for a second. Doesn't feel nice, does it? Besides a few playful sound effects, the system software is as soulless as the 360's avatars. This design is actually clean and relatively modern and kinda nice looking, but it's not Nintendo's style. Nintendo is literally the definition of fruitiger arrow. That is their aesthetic. If this doesn't scream Nintendo to you, I literally don't know what else could. Every other console has some kind of warm music going on in the background. Ambient, inviting sounds that let you know that you're safe and in a place where you're about to have fun. The Switch, the most it can offer is a bit of light coil whine. Also, Nintendo Switch Online. It's a bad service that's not worth the price tag. I don't know if you remember this, but the Switch in 2017 launched with free online play, only for Nintendo to erect a paywall afterwards. Free entry to the party tonight, ladies and gentlemen. Once you get inside, you're gonna have to start paying. Gating online play behind a paywall is borderline criminal behavior in my book anyway, even though I don't play games online. But friend codes suck. The lack of party chat sucks. Their selection of emulated games is a massive step down from Virtual Console, and it's just a lame overall experience. So the flaws with the Switch, it has thermal issues, Joy-Con drift, the system's software has zero character, and NSO is a lackluster experience. But here's the thing, and this brings me to the last point of this video. I am concerned about the Switch too. The Switch is the least Nintendo-y Nintendo console, and that's dangerous because it's also Nintendo's most successful console. With all of the announcements surrounding the Switch 2, it seems like the lesson that they have learned from the Switch was, don't be weird, don't take risks, and you'll be rewarded. Also, rip everyone off and you'll be even more rewarded. I'm surprised this was $10 instead of $90. Frankly, that's a bad lesson for Nintendo to learn because the games industry is one of the worst, most complacent, most lazy, and risk-averse industries that I regularly interface with. And, well, Nintendo used to do things differently. They used to try new things. They used to take risks. And that's why I can't hold out hope for the Switch 2. It looks like more of the boring same. I suspect that we'll have Joy-Con drift. I suspect that we'll have thermal issues. And I think that we're going to have even more anti-customer behavior. And that right there, $80? That is anti-customer behavior. The question is, if Nintendo's not going to push the industry forward, who will? Oh. Hi, Gabe. Welcome to the video. That's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you hit that like button. You can also get subscribed to stay up to date with all the fun stuff I'm doing here on the channel. I have a mailing list. You can subscribe to blog.gardinerbryant.com. There's a mailing list. I post these videos early as articles over there, so you can head over there and get more details on the cool things that I'm working on. And I also post stuff that aren't going to be turned into videos. So check it out, blog.gardinerbryant.com. It's really fun stuff. I also want to take a moment and thank these fine folks for their support of this channel. It's because of them that I am able to make these videos and make them fun and interesting and try new things. This is a new style of video for me, and I really appreciate you watching and taking a moment to be here and hanging out with me. With that said, that's it for now. Watch my other videos. Thank you, and I'll talk to you later.